Welcome to the Up Arrow Podcast with William Harris, featuring top business leaders sharing strategies and resources to get to the next level. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hey everybody, William Harris here. I'm the founder and CEO of Element and the host of this podcast where I feature experts in the D2C industry sharing strategies on how to scale your business and achieve your goals. And today I have with me Alex Greifeld. Alex has been working in e-com and digital marketing for more than a decade for companies that range from bootstrap brands to global names like Coach and Kate Spade. Now she helps brands break through their growth plateaus by leveraging their unique relationship between customers, marketing, and merchandise. And I think when I was thinking about where we just met on Twitter, right? There was no introduction. We just engaged with each other's content and we're like, hey, she's really smart. I like her, right? Something like that.
Yeah. I don't think we've ever met in person yet.
No, we haven't, not yet. So I want to dig into a little bit of the backstory. I want to dig into what you're seeing with no best practices. Before we do get into the meat of the topic, though, I want to make sure I announce our sponsor real quick. This episode is brought to you by Element. Element is an award-winning advertising agency optimizing e-commerce campaigns around profit. In fact, we've helped 13 of our customers get acquired, with the largest one selling for nearly $800 million, and we were ranked as the 12th fastest growing agency in the world by Adweek. That said, enough of the boring stuff, on to the good stuff. Alex, why did you start your company? What is it about this that you're passionate about that made you say, okay, I want to go and help brands, specifically e-commerce retail brands, be more successful?
So I got into marketing because I was really customer obsessed. I actually started my career in fashion design. I was a mom jeans designer before mom jeans were cool.
Nice.
Like when real moms were still buying them. So I did that for about 3 years. Wholesale was a huge component of the business. So we didn't know a lot about who was buying our product, why they liked it, why they didn't. And I really just felt that gap and decided to transition over to digital marketing and e-commerce. And that's really what's continued to drive and motivate me, is just curiosity around why certain things work, why other things don't, like what really motivates people.
Curiosity is such a powerful characteristic that I think is undervalued oftentimes, right? But it's that curiosity that allows you to just keep digging and say, yeah, but why? But why? In fact, I think it was Albert Einstein, and I don't know if this is true, but at least there's like this, story that goes around where it's like, he talks about how he was like, I'm not smarter than anybody else. I was just more curious. When everybody else was, done asking why the sky was blue, I was still asking that. I just thought by that time was old enough to be able to start answering those questions too.
Yeah. Curiosity is a really powerful thing. And the more you're able to tap into it, even when it comes to things that seem like old hat, the more it keeps you going. It keeps you from getting burnt out.
Absolutely. And so one of the things that you have hinged on that I wanted to talk about that a lot of your content talks about on Twitter, on LinkedIn, is no best practices, right? Like this is a thing that you oftentimes are talking about with people. What do you mean by no best practices? Why is this something that you are so passionate about?
So at the start of my marketing career, I would always, whenever we went into a meeting with an agency or a vendor, one of my bosses would always ask, so what are the best practices for using this? And I started to do it too, because I really admired this person and I'm like, that's just what
Sure.
you do. And then I got into a point in my career in a different role where everyone was throwing every best practice in the book at this situation, at this business problem, and none of it was working. And that's when I realized that the best practices, as popular as they are, they don't typically explain the root causes of what's going on. And you have to be really thoughtful about when you hear a success story, what are all the different aspects of that brand? Like, what's their funding model? What's their category? What's their price point? You can't just apply a winning idea from one brand to another that's completely different, because it typically doesn't work. And so
Yeah.
That's a pattern I'd just seen over and over as I got more involved in e-commerce and even into DTC Twitter. And so I thought it would be a fun name for my own brand.
It is. And it makes you think, right? Now, you're not actually against all best practices, right? Because there's room for best practices. One thing that I think about is it's like, what's best practice to use a circle for a wheel on a car? Sure, you might be able to make it out of a square or a triangle, but like there's enough science to back that up. But I think where you get, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I feel similarly, is that it's a very lazy approach to optimizing something. You say, well, what's the best practice? Let's just do that. And there's not necessarily a lot of thought behind the context in that particular best practice where you say, that's great, but that doesn't make any sense for our particular demographic or our niche or whatever that we're doing, right? So it's like without that context, it's just a lazy approach instead of actually thinking about your customers and actually thinking about your products.
Yeah. And there's also an aspect of it where it's like, yes, there's a list of things that you should do to give yourself your best odds of success for a given tactic. Like there's definitely what I would call best practices for Facebook ads or Google ads or like web user experience. But you have to take a step back and ask yourself, do these best practices conflict with my long-term goals? Like if I'm trying to build a really strong brand equity, is doing these best practices like the right move for me? I think that's an important question that brands need to ask themselves as well.
Yeah, and let's talk about, one of those best practices that I always struggled with and I kind of harped against for a while was the idea of giving people coupon codes before they've even spent like 3 seconds on your website. Sure, I get that that's a best practice in the idea that everybody's doing it and talking about how much that increases their, purchase rate at that point in time. But the downside to it, in my opinion, and from what I've seen through a lot of data with customers, is all you've done is you've just acquired a lot of people who were interested in coupons. When you look at the cohort analyses of them, they don't necessarily translate into better customers long term. And so when you're talking about long term health of the brand, trying to see, hey, do people actually want this at full price? There's a lot more benefit to that oftentimes before just immediately hitting them with a coupon before they've even had a chance to decide if they like you or not.
Yeah, the welcome pop-up discourse kind of drives me nuts because almost no one measures, do the customers you acquire actually purchase? Do they stay engaged? If they do purchase, do they buy again? Like your philosophy towards any channel, but especially email specifically here. If it's any customer, I'll take any customer that I can get.
Sure.
Then you don't know, you're not really managing your own destiny in terms of like where your business is going. And I can understand it from both sides because especially if you're bootstrapped, it's like you need to keep the cash flowing in, but you also need to keep your long-term objectives in mind.
Yeah. And to a point, sometimes when you are short-sighted, it can really ruin the long term. What are some other marketing myths that you find are out there as being touted as best practices, but you're cringe every time that you hear somebody talk about these things?
So retention is the new acquisition, or
Sure.
you don't need to do acquisition you can grow your business with retention, or just a lot of what you hear around email marketing. Retention is just something that like historically very few people are measuring it in a way that helps you really understand the value of your marketing. Like if your business is healthy, people are going to come back and buy from you again, whether you send them emails or not. Like there's a baseline rate of retention. And if you're not measuring that, then you're not measuring the lift in retention that any given tactic might be driving. So you could be doing all of these things, throwing a discount in front of a customer who is going to buy at full price anyway. And unless you measure it the right way, your retention strategies could actually be diluting your lifetime value of your customers.
Sure. It reminds me of, let's just say from like a biologic perspective, you have your basal metabolic rate, right? Where it's like the amount of calories that you're simply going to burn for existing, right? You lay in bed all day, but it's like you're going to burn whatever that is, 800 calories or whatever that is, just by just breathing and existing. It's almost like there's like a basal retention rate, right? Where it's like, what is your just standard retention rate where you're going to get these customers buying again, even if you didn't send out an SMS or an email or advertise to them again? You need to know what that is. How do brands go about figuring out what that is? Because it's not like they can just stop everything they're doing now to figure out, well, what is your basic retention rate?
Yeah, I mean, it's honestly something that's really tricky to measure holistically. One thing that you can do is just start doing holdout testing for any given
Yeah,
retention tactic, like any offers you want to run, or even like email frequency and cadence. Like I get that that's difficult unless you have the right tech stack in place. It's kind of a pain in the butt to actually execute that. Um, Another thing that you can do is you can monitor the retention rates of customers who are opted into email versus not opted in if for a given period, and
Mm,
that will give you a sense of, you know, the general lift that email is giving you. You probably want to look at like for like customers, because customers that are predisposed to purchasing again are often the ones who are going to opt into email. So
sure.
there's a little bit of nuance there. I think a lot of that stuff is it, and this is what I say to a lot of brands. It's like getting in the weeds with retention doesn't start to pay off until you're doing at least $50 million a year.
Sure.
Like when you're smaller than that, you should focus on getting the basics right and just um, not listening to anyone who's trying to sell you on like quick retention hacks or things that
Sure.
are going to like dilute your customer base.
Yeah. Yeah. The nuances where, you can get sidetracked so easily as a small brand by this shiny object or this shiny object. And the reality is it's like, just do the basics right. And then you can iterate from there. I think that makes a lot of sense. What about on, is that the same for SMS as well? Cause you were talking about like on email, SMS is obviously growing significantly. Do you find people doing the same bad habits there on SMS? Are they doing some things better?
I think the one thing that keeps people under control with SMS a little bit is that it costs money to send each of the
Sure.
messages. So you can't, if you're sending like three, like I know brands that send 3, 4, 5 emails a day. Like you can't really do that with SMS unless
Sure.
you prove out the business case there. Um, what I've found is that if email, I mean, you kind of cultivate your email list based on the content that you send. If you mail really often and it's very promotional heavy messaging, like that, the customer who likes that is the customer that's going to end up in your email file. With
Sure.
SMS, it's typically the people who are already really bought into you. Like, unless you have some kind of incentive to get people to sign up, your SMS file is going to over index for like 3x and 4x and beyond, like your loyal
Sure.
buyers versus prospects. So I think the one thing that I don't see a lot of brands do, but that feels like a missed opportunity, is really giving people a reason to sign up to either email or SMS. Like you'll get notifications of our new product drops is not like a market, like you're not marketing the value of
Right.
that list. So thinking about, I know there are some brands who do like SMS flash sales, and the only way to access the sale is like you have to be opted into the list, and you have to shop the sale in the first hour after they send out the link, and then they
Mm.
close it. So like that's
Hmm.
an example of creating a unique marketing use case around a channel versus just thinking of it as like another way to push messages out to people.
Yeah, because we are all inundated with messages so much as it is. I like to talk about romancing your customers, and I know that one of the things that we do on the advertising side a lot is we see people where the day that they bought something from company A, they're receiving ads to buy again. that same day or something like that, right? And it's like, or there's like this immediate, like, okay, let's target them for an upsell or whatever that might be. It's like you've taken zero time to actually just romance them. You take a little bit of time to create a relationship with them, show them something that they're excited about, show them about how your product makes their lives better. So they just look at this and say, wow, that's amazing. And I'm just very excited about this. I can't wait for it to come in the mail, before you immediately hit them back up with another sale. And I think the same is true for creating that relationship from an email and an SMS perspective as well.
Yeah, I think the idea of really speaking about your product is it's like a muscle that's gotten weak over the past 2 decades, because the first decade of like mass e-commerce adoption, like the mid 2000, the mid aughties through like 2015.
Sure.
There was just so much free traffic. Like, from a macro point of view, people were shifting their shopping habits online. If you had a lot of in real life awareness around your brand, people were just kind of like going to your site. No one realized what the value of attention online was. So people would just like write blogs about things they liked and not charge money for it. And like all the social media sites were giving away free traffic. So it was enough to just put an image in front of that passive traffic source and like collect money.
I'm here.
Yeah. And now what you find is like a lot of brands they're faced with this challenge of like, okay, well, how do we build out a real like copywriting capability?
Mm-hmm.
How do we really think about the stories that we want to tell around this product and how we communicate that to people? And the brands that are able to figure that out, the marketing just becomes that more effective.
Yeah. Yeah. So myth number one, retention, and the way that people are going about it and figuring out what their basic retention rate is and figuring out what's incremental beyond that, which is, even figuring out like how incremental is the email, how incremental is their SMS, how incremental is their catalogs, how incremental is their, retargeting, advertising, like all of these things coming together and figuring out like what's that right mix from that. And you suggested holdout tests, which I'm a big fan of, and complicated to do, especially to do them right. But if you are a brand that's big enough and you need to get a little bit of a better understanding, it's one of the best ways to truly understand how incremental something is. What else, though? What are some other marketing myths? One of the things that you mentioned to me, and maybe this is where you're going to go to, is the intersection of merchandising and marketing. You said that was a big one.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a myth, but it's like it's just something that it's kind of like an untapped opportunity where the number one thing you need to know about merchandising as a marketer is that your best-selling products make your conversion rate go up, which makes your ad efficiency go up.
Sure.
So if you have a broad assortment of products, figure out a way to get your best sellers in front of more people, like put them on the homepage, put them in your emails for new customers, like put them in your welcome series, put them in your paid social advertising. Some of your products there's kind of the two schools of thought when it comes to retail that are both a bit outdated. The first is just that, we bring in a big load of traffic, we send it to the site and we kind of let it loose. Which isn't exactly what happens. And then the other is that you can push demand into any product you sell profitably. Like some of your products are just, especially if you're a fashion brand and you're turning over the assortment, not every product is going to be a winner. So you have to realize that you reach a point of diminishing returns where if something isn't working, like featuring it in 5 different Facebook ads is not going to make it work. So there's a sweet spot in the middle where it's, you're using your bestsellers as an acquisition vehicle. You're using the next, like if your bestsellers are your top 10% of your assortment, you're using the next 20 to 30% as kind of like a retention vehicle. And then the rest of it, people buy it if they like it, and it's kind of there, and it doesn't focus as heavily in your marketing.
Yeah, I think that's smart. So to your point, where if you've got something that's working well, go ahead and scale that. If it's not working well, maybe don't continue to just find 800 million ways to waste money on advertising for it. Move on to the next thing that's selling well and keep pushing those, and let those products that aren't selling as well be upsells, things like that for people when they're on the website. You can use them in the retention. And I even like the idea of sometimes using certain products from a cash flow perspective, where you say, okay, these items, you haven't sold through them, you need to get rid of them. And so sometimes there are better ways to get rid of them versus just trying to advertise them away, because now you're just losing a lot of the efficiency on that.
Yeah, definitely. And the kind of the next level of that, which there honestly a lot of brands they haven't gone there, but the Facebook is almost like you're, as a media buyer or a marketing organization or whatever, you're almost like the department store buyer for the Facebook audience. So if you know
Sure.
that paid social, like meta advertising, or even any other paid channels, whatever your top acquisition source is, to a certain extent, you should design new products and plan inventory into that. Like if you know that if a product that does really well in ads has certain characteristics, make more of that.
Yeah.
Or don't. I mean, but that's a way to really create like an incredibly profitable feedback loop between paid social and merchandising.
Yeah, and I feel like that's something that's come up on a lot of podcast episodes here. We're talking about just marketing needing to have more communication, less siloed, more communication with the different departments, and so more communication with the merchandising team, more communication with the finance team, more communication with the inventory team and whoever's placing the orders. And one of the things that I've seen run into, to your point, where there's oftentimes seasonality components, especially when you're in the fashion side of things, where maybe jeans start coming out, and I don't have this pulled up, but maybe it's September, right? Whatever time frame that is, when it starts getting a little bit cold out and back to school starts happening, maybe the search for jeans starts going up. And what I've seen people neglect, though, is actually just even looking at search terms reports within Google Analytics to see your specific site users. And so you might look at this and say, okay, typically this is going, let's say, first week of October, but on your site, searches for these particular products are skyrocketing first week of August. Well, use that data to inform whether or not you're ordering those products earlier for your particular users, because they might have needs for those things that you didn't realize that don't fit maybe the general trend. Then you've been missing out on sales because you just weren't aware to your specific users' searches.
Right. And I think something that's a real challenge is, at least in the fashion, footwear, accessories space, what you'll see often is brands who either got started selling to wholesale like
Sure.
a decade or more in the past, or they launched recently and they were just able to scale a lot more quickly there. And then the wholesale buying calendar and the conventions of that whole channel go on to dictate e-commerce, like when we
Sure.
can put product online, when we can mark it down, even what we buy and what we display on the site. And it's just it's very hard to grow an e-commerce business with that as your framework, especially because a lot of the big wholesale accounts in those categories, the businesses themselves are not doing well. So
Sure.
it's really hard to succeed when your partners are setting the rules and they're not profitable.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so, to a point, you're almost saying, if you're a wholesale business that's transitioning to more D2C, you need to decouple the two a little bit as much as you possibly can, and let e-commerce run with the quick, fast data that it has to make those informed decisions versus relying on an antiquated calendar, is kind of what you're saying.
In an ideal world, yes. It's never that simple. I hate
No.
to say these things because it's like it's never that simple. If wholesale 70% of your business, that's funding your payroll and your overhead,
Right.
and and everything. But then you have to kind of step back and say, well, maybe my goal of making e-commerce 50% of my business in the next like 18 months is unrealistic. And I have to understand what results are realistic with the parameters I have set here.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's good. What else do you think holds back wholesalers from being successful as they migrate over to e-commerce then? So are there certain best practices that are getting in their way?
Like department stores or specialty
Yeah,
stores?
yeah. Like or a brand that's selling to the department stores.
Oh, okay. So I think the big one that I always advise every brand who sells to wholesale accounts is, in every selling agreement where you can get away with it, tell the wholesaler they can't bid on your brand terms. Like that's becoming a little bit less relevant in the world of PMAX. Like that anyone can basically do anything they want to your shopping listings, but like in terms of just knock down, drag out bidding wars for like branded search, really low bottom of the funnel branded search terms, like that just, it's like lighting cash on fire. So just get that out of the way and monitor it. I think you also have to look at your unit economics. A lot of brands who have a big wholesale component, you'll talk to them and it's like, okay, we can afford to spend like 10 to 15% of our AOV to acquire a new customer. Well, you better be generating demand somewhere in the real world and pushing it online. And that's not typically what's happening. It's like, oh, we want to make Facebook ads work, but we can spend $10 to get a $100 order.
Well, and what's interesting on that side of things, to your point, is let's say that, they're typically taking a bigger loss than 10% when they're wholesaling this to a department store, but they're only willing to take that 10% loss on the D2C side of things without even realizing that there's a significant difference in 10% to wholesale versus 10% on e-commerce. Because the 10% on e-commerce, you own that customer now. You own that customer's email and their ability to remarket to them, and so you can start looking at the LTV. Whereas on that wholesale order, you haven't. Sure, you've got the wholesale customer, but you haven't acquired the individual user customer to be able to remarket to them. And so there's a difference sometimes in being willing to spend a little bit more on that e-commerce side to get that moving is wise.
Yeah, and you have, you never want to be in a business relationship where the other party's like financial incentives are different, like vastly different from yours. Like a lot of the big wholesale accounts they're not bootstrapped and they're not profitable. So if you're a bootstrapped brand who's like really trying to manage cash flow, and all of your partners have those different incentives and they have the power over you, that's not, it's just a hard road to be on.
Sure. Something else that you said to me that I really liked, you talked about prioritization. You said, stopping the insanity, the million things that we could be doing and deciding what to focus on is something that I think that you talk about often, even in LinkedIn stuff as well, as just being able to find that prioritization. And when you're a big brand, there's so many things that you can possibly do to improve your overall marketing situation. And if we even just go to retention, for instance, you could run a holdout test to understand the incrementality of your email. You could run a holdout test to understand the incrementality of SMS differently. You could run a holdout test on your catalogs and your direct mail, and you could run all of these different tests. And it is hard sometimes for brands to know how to prioritize what to do. How do you go about figuring out and guiding brands towards making the right decisions from a prioritization standpoint?
So a lot of what happens in terms of prioritization is we have a high level goal, like we need to grow 10% this year. Okay, let's make a list of tactics and we'll do the easiest ones first. Sure. And there's a middle step that has to happen there, which is, and at least the way I like to do it is like, okay, we want to grow 10% this year. Realistically, how much of that is going to come from acquisition versus retention? How do we break those down into customer level goals? Like we had 1,000 customers last year. We need to acquire like 1,300 this year. And then you start drilling into different channels and metrics where you can affect that. And that's where you start getting into like the tactics. But a lot of these tactics, especially if they're coming in from like a third party, they make big promises on, what kind of impact you can expect to see.
Sure.
So part of it is just knowing like what's reasonable, like what's a reasonable goal to expect. Like a really good one is retention. There's a very real ceiling on retention, and typically, if you're a mono brand ecom business, like between 20 and 30 of the new customers let me go back. Out of every 100 new customers you acquire, between 20 and 30 will come back and purchase again. So, and if the business is doing really, really well, you'll get up to like 35, 38, maybe 40. If your growth plan hinges on going from 21 out of 100 to 50 out of 100 in a year, like that's never going to happen. So it's part of it is about setting realistic goals, and to a certain extent that just comes from experience. So there is some value in experience.
Well, and I even like the framework that we use oftentimes is the ICE scoring framework, right? Which is going to basically be like, what's the impact, what's the confidence, and what's the ease? Because to your point, sometimes it is nice to be able to say, what's that quick win? This one's easy, low impact, high confidence. Just knock this out. That's a good one. But oftentimes we do focus too much on sometimes knocking out the easy things and not knocking out the things that are going to take 4 months to implement, but have significantly more room for overall growth. And we just keep knocking out these small little piddly things, and we never get around to the higher impact things. And so being able to mark that out and say, this one's got high impact. This one has a lot of potential. To your point, retention, maybe retention took a backseat for a while. And I would say that I think that's fair to say that for a while, there's a resurgence of people talking about retention now because it took a backseat to acquisition for the last few years where we went real heavy on it and we maybe didn't focus enough on retention. Great, let's focus a little bit on retention, but realizing, to your point, it's a limiting factor. You're not going to most likely double your business by focusing on retention. You can squeeze out that incremental performance, and that might be a really important thing that puts you in the right spot from a cash flow and productivity point of view to be able to do what you need to do now to go out and focus on acquisition again. And so, but it might be a smaller win, a smaller impact, and say, okay, how do we continue to use that to leverage getting into the bigger impact things?
Yeah. A while ago on Twitter, I asked a question, and it was something like, you need to grow your sales by 20% this year. You have two options. The first is you could just start doing 30% off all orders and just make that your evergreen offer.
Sure.
And then your second option is you can invest like $30K in customer research and hire a copywriter and start refining the messaging across your marketing funnel. And it's like, out of those two choices, which one are you going to take? And in the goody two shoes idealized world, you'd be like, do the market research, hire the copywriter.
Sure.
But it's like a high risk, high reward strategy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why some of these quick wins decisions get made. And at a higher level, you need to make sure that A, you're setting up the right incentives so that people are making decisions on the right time frame. And then B, you need to you need to be realistic, but also not get yourself into a position where your option set is just bad and worse,
Sure. If I was going to summarize what you said a little bit in a more brash way, I would say you don't have the guts to grow the way that you want to grow. Like, you need to be willing to take some chances here and do something that has a higher impact thing. But yeah, there's a little bit higher risk as well, but you got to take those risks. Otherwise, you're going to get stuck in vanilla land and you're never going to be able to grow out of that.
Yeah. You have to put yourself into the position where you can take risks without breaking your legs. Like
Yeah,
if you're, if you're if you have a warehouse full of inventory and like $100 in the bank, then like, yeah, run the 30% off offer, but
sure.
make every decision as if you're trying to give yourself some breathing room to take calculated risks.
Yes, absolutely. You got to take some big swings sometime. Um, these are some really good thoughts. Do you have any other thoughts that you want to make sure that we share from a no best practices standpoint, or what e-commerce merchants should be doing to make sure they're thinking about growth in the right ways for 2023 before we dig into some of the personal stuff of who is Alex Greifeld?
Yeah, I think um, hmm, every marketer should learn more about operations, merchandising, and finance. I
Sure.
tweet a lot of different resources around those topics. I'm not going to give you a reading list right now, but I think it will make you a much stronger marketer.
If you want to send those over, we could always add those to the transcript here too. So that way people can just click on them and go read some of the things that you're suggesting here.
Yes, I will try to get that over to you.
Yeah. Um, so digging into the who is Alex, one of the questions that I like to know is what what happened in your childhood? What was it like growing up for you that you think maybe lends itself towards who you are today? The Alex that we know that is talking about prioritization and optimizing in the right context. Were you always this way, or is there something that triggered this, or why are you the Alex that we know?
Yeah, the short answer is no. I grew up. I hated math. You know,
Really?
I had some really bad experiences with math classes and math teachers. I would always take the advanced classes, but like really struggle to keep my grades in a good place. Like math was just something I absolutely struggled with, and my teachers were all pretty bad. Like especially
Mm.
compared to some of the experiences I had later on in life. So I was like, I initially I wanted to study fine arts. I got into fashion as a more commercial, like a more commercial way to be creative for a living.
Yeah.
Um, and then I got into the industry, and I was just like, A, this is actually not creative. And B, I'm going to be living with roommates until I'm 40 if I keep doing this. So, um, a lot of there was just a lot more being written about e-commerce and digital marketing at that time. I think it was around 2008, 2010. I really started getting into it. And so I was like, okay, actually, this is really interesting. And the more I returned to it, the more I even started to get interested in the numbers, the number aspects of it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, it's funny that you said that about like needing roommates right until you're 40. It actually reminds me of something my brother said to me, who has a degree in mathematics. But I remember him telling me a similar joke, which was, "What's the difference between a large pizza and a degree in mathematics?" And his answer was, "A large pizza can feed a family of four." And it's just yeah, that to some degree, a degree in mathematics in and of itself might not necessarily lend itself towards capitalization, but I think that's true in a lot of fields, like you said, fine arts, whatever. There's a lot of ways to where it can be hard to find that sweet spot, that niche. And e-commerce blends itself very well for people who are creative and mathematical to be able to use both sides of their brain in ways that allow them to find ways to scale businesses really nicely.
Yeah, I agree. I really enjoy it. I guess I've been doing it for a decade, and I don't feel any strong urge to do something else, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Although you do have something new taking up your free time. We were talking about this a little bit ago as well. What is, as a new mom, what does free time look like for you now?
Um, yeah, I had my first child, I guess, about last February, so more than a year. It's been more than a year. I'm not
Congrats.
quite a rookie mom anymore, but
Yeah.
still learning a lot. Yeah, free time. Obviously, I have a lot less free time, and I really prioritize like working out and
Yeah.
relaxing. Like
You
that.
have
Those
to.
are the two things that I do with my free time now.
Yeah, and it's important, and I think you talked about it. As self-care, it's like it's important to take care of your physical body, your mental body, to be able to say it's like, what do I need to be able to stay in a healthy place, so that way I can do good with my work, so that way I can be present for my. It was daughter or son?
Daughter.
Yeah, for your
Yeah.
daughter, right? And so I've got 3 kids, and it's I would almost say it's impossible to find that perfect balance. But you at least strive each day to find some kind of equilibrium between all of that. So good for you, and
Yeah.
congrats.
Thank you.
What about books? Are there any books that you like to read, or any books or podcasts that you listen to that you feel have helped you along your path?
So I used to read a lot of business books, and I was kind of finding that I wasn't retaining a ton of it. And what you quickly realize is a lot of business books could have been a blog post.
Yes.
Um, there are some podcasts and blogs, and I guess I'll send around a list after this to put in the show
Sure.
notes. But there are some that I think consistently provide like a lot of value that I read regularly, but I get I guess most of my inspiration as a marketer from speaking with others, like speaking with my peers or people who
Yeah.
have progressed. Well, actually, people who are more senior than me and people who are more junior than me and my peers. So everyone, like you can really learn from everyone. Um,
Yes.
and then I always recommend this, and it's polarizing, but I think reading fiction is really good just for
Oh,
creativity and empathy. And also, if you do, well, most of us do a lot of writing as part of our work. Like it helps you become a better writer.
100%.
um so I know some people just hate fiction. I get it. I won't, but I think it's incredibly
Do people hate
valuable.
fiction, or they just find their time better spent being productive? Or do they actually hate fiction?
I think maybe hate is a strong word, but they don't enjoy it, nor do they see any
Sure.
business
Really?
value in it.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I like fiction. I don't read as much of it as I used to, partly because of the productivity. And when I do have some free time, there's just other things that I find myself doing. But what types of fiction books are you reading right now? Is there one in particular that, like, oh, this was a really good one, and if you haven't read this one, I highly recommend it?
So this year, I've been reading all the work of Patrick Modiano, who was he wrote a lot between I think like the mid 50s through the mid 80s was the bulk of his work, and it it's a lot about memory and like the unreliability
Mm.
of memory, but the books themselves are just very vibey. It's like people have amnesia, or like some guy is looking for like a woman that he thinks he remembers from his childhood, or like people are running away to the Swiss Alps and changing their identities. So
Oh,
it's a
wow.
lot of beautiful writing and like tone setting, and just
Yeah.
really enjoyable.
Well, and to your point, like you said, maybe people don't recognize the business value in it, but uh, I think that there's a lot to be said for being creative, allowing your brain to think in creative ways again, not just in logical structures, and being able to understand some of the human psyche that's going on in the character development and all of that helps you better understand how can what are these basic impulses that consumers have as well, and how can I make sure that I'm addressing them within my creative or within my landing pages. And so I think that I would agree with you that it's undervalued oftentimes, but has a very profound impact on thinking.
Yeah. And I also read a lot of random Twitter accounts. I
Yeah.
just
Like, how random are we talking about?
um I think it just helps you become a better copywriter. Like
Yeah.
when you see tweets that have gone viral, even if they have nothing to do with marketing, like starting to I feel like that's made me a better tweet writer. is adapting
Yeah.
some of those conventions.
Sure. It reminds me of there's a book, I believe it's called A Swim in the Pond in the Rain. And it's written by a Syracuse professor. I'm drawing a blank on his name right now. But it's 4 Russian short stories and that he goes through. And I'm trying to remember who all was in there. And I don't remember, but I don't quote me on it. It's been a little while since I read it now. But one of the things they talk about is the impact of writing short stories and how every word absolutely has to matter when you're writing a short story. And there's almost like this competition of how to write the shortest story. And it's very wild. It's very much like what Twitter is, where if you do look at this and you think through every word, exactly where it's placed and what it means and how it's leading somebody in towards this thought, it's very interesting to see that there can be a lot of brilliance that went into this tweet that might have seemed like it was written haphazardly, but it wasn't. It was written very intentionally. Sometimes they were just by accident, but oftentimes there was a lot of very thoughtful intentionality behind every word that was chosen for that tweet.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So I also like to end with a fun little game oftentimes, speaking of words and everything, where I give you a word and it is just a completely made up word. Well, it's not a made up word. It's a real word, but it's a word that I don't expect you to know the definition of. And just for fun, it's like balderdash. You give me a definition that you think sounds believable that we could believe for this word that you have likely not heard of before. So the word that I'm choosing here is whiffler. Whiffler. Alex, what is the definition of whiffler that we should believe?
The Whiffler is a Chinese drop shipping product that is advertised on Twitter that you can use to clean dust off your steering wheel.
Yeah, obviously, because when that dust accumulates on your steering wheel, you're turning left, and all of a sudden you get that dust, and it's an accident waiting to happen, and you need to use the whiffler. That is fantastic. That is not the definition of it, though. Nobody's ever gotten one of these right, which is good because I'm trying to pick words that are very obscure. If you want to look up what the definition of it is and comment in, that would be fun. If people wanted to follow you, connect with you, work with you, what is the best way for them to stay in touch?
So follow me on Twitter. My handle is Hey, it's Alex P as in Peter. My website is knowbestpractices.co, and you can sign up for my newsletter there. It's also the link in my Twitter bio. I send it out twice a month, so it's not you won't be inundated with newsletters.
4 times a day, right?
Yeah. Maybe I'll get there one day, but right now, it's just twice a month.
Perfect. Alex, this is all really great. And I appreciate you taking the time to share some of your knowledge and time with us here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yep. And thank you, everybody else, for joining in. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Up Arrow podcast with William Harris. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.